You're listening to In the Making, the podcast series from the Cream Room. I'm Martin Lumsden, and this is my chance to have a conversation with artists, producers, writers and performers talking about what it's like to be doing the thing that they love to do. Jay Fisher performs under the name Apple Rabbits and has recently released the EP Oberkampf on Kilburn State Records. Jay has been working as a musician for many years and began recording at an early age. We started by talking about our memories of being young.
I wasn't as intelligent as these people. I wasn't as grown up as them. So they can be both young and grown up.
Yes.
Whereas I was just young. And I was naive and easily led. And I worked with this guy called Mike Howlett. And I used to do all of my stuff at that point was 4-track recordings. And I was just really into 4-track recordings. And what I wanted to do was to do that. And pretty much what I'm doing now is what I wanted to do then. Except there's more to it than 4-track recording. But I couldn't tell him. And I remember him being really frustrated with me, just saying, just tell me, what did he say? He said, you being shy doesn't mean that you're a nice person. It means that you're an egomaniac. And he just sort of launched into me. It was like, your inability to kind of say what you mean, it doesn't, it's not endearing,
It's frustrating.
You're an arsehole. Just tell me, I can cope.
Yeah.
And I could never do it. So I ended up being what seems to me now is very sneaky, but at the time it was just because I was so unable to kind of get into conflicts or say what I mean. I was so second-guessing all the time, everyone around me, that I ended up falling out with everyone because I then sneakily tried to get out of my record deal, or I didn't like my album, and then I would do interviews where I would go, "Oh, I hate this shit."
Yeah.
But it was my own fault because I wasn't grown up enough to get what I want. I wasn't like these guys.
Was that because you were Were you actually blaming other people for the fact that it wasn't working out, or was it more a kind of lack of confidence?
I
or
knew
lack
that
of belief
it was me.
or
I knew that it was completely down to me.
Yeah.
But because I wasn't able to kind of express that, I wasn't able to go to them and go, "Geez, I'm an idiot. I didn't say what I wanted. I didn't sort of do a setup with them saying, look, I'm sorry, I can be like this," because I didn't do it. So as it is, there are people from the 90s who I'm kind of worried about seeing again. But it's like 20 odd years later.
Yeah.
And
it's the sort of thing that you remember that they've forgotten.
Probably can't even remember it. They'd probably bump into me in the street and wouldn't even know who I was.
The things that we build up as huge significance.
Yeah, but the thing is that if you don't, often is when you say it, it then becomes irrelevant, like really quickly.
Yes.
For 15 years worth of stuff suddenly becomes irrelevant when someone then turns around and says, "Yeah, well, it's just what you were doing." Well, I mean, my main point is because I was listening to your podcast, and I bump into kind of. See, I'm really pleased that I don't find young. I know I'm dwelling on the old thing.
Yeah.
I'm really pleased that I find, because I expected to get to a certain point in my life and find young musicians scary. Because we're both actually from a time where you got to a certain point in your life and things were, you had to possibly identify with a group.
Yes, yeah.
And then when that group ran out of its coolness, you then became the butt of everyone's jokes, and you had to come.
Oh, you still like them?
Yeah,
they're not cool anymore.
It was a constant, with a kind of popular culture, and things seem to have changed, and young people are much nicer than they used to be, and so you get that kind of fine, and sort of more. I don't know. I expected to be frightened of what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I'm not frightened of what they're doing. I'm kind of interested in what they're doing. And it's Lauren, sorry. And what I thought when I was listening to her was, God, what would it be like to be produced by someone who's from a completely different generation to you? What is their take on what you're doing? Because that would be something new to me.
Yeah. It's only flipped though. Is that not always been the case? The example, as is always the case, that kind of tends to pop into my head is the Beatles.
Yeah.
quite clearly being produced by someone who was from a completely different generation to them, just the other way around.
Yeah, was a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was a very good thing. Yeah.
It wasn't a necessity that it was a contemporary who was producing them. It was,
No.
And that might be the way that things were, because you needed to earn your right to do it, and more so, I think, then than you do now.
And that seems like more of a natural thing. But it doesn't seem natural to me, because I don't feel like I know anymore, and it's quite clear like, that at this point in history I don't know anymore. You know, everything I know is kind of, you can just Google it.
Yeah.
So things have changed. I mean, we don't need to look to an older person to produce your album. You just need someone who has some ideas.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that's kind of I think that's a bit new. It's a bit of a new idea. I know that other people are just listening to you interviewing those guys, you know, on your podcast. You were just like, oh no, I completely accept what you're saying. You've had a 10-year career, and your natural inclination is to go, well, how can you? But then Michael Jackson certainly had by the time he was 20, he'd been around a while.
He'd been around a while. I remember that, like, talking about the youth thing, going back to the Beatles again, was that their entire catalogue of recordings as the Beatles was complete and released before any of them were the age of 30.
Yeah.
And you go, my God,
Yeah.
really? That whole thing that that virtually everyone is still utterly inspired by and captivated by was done by seriously young guys.
Yeah. And it is quite disturbing.
Yeah.
And
So does that make you feel old?
I don't think any of it makes me feel old. I don't feel old. I just feel like I can't really remember stuff. And I can't really remember if... Because you can listen back to what you did when you were 20. I can listen back to what I did when I was 16 and go, Christ, that was really good. I like, you know, I can hear not even a progression.
What were you doing when you were 16? Tell me about that.
When I was 16... I was a drawing kid, so I used to draw. My two main occupations were drawing and taping absolutely everything. So taping people talking, taping cars going past. I use a lot of these recordings now on my stuff because I'm still doing the same thing. I'm still doing that same thing.
I was listening to the recording you had of a rainstorm.
Oh, exactly.
Love that.
Yeah.
just thought this is great.
Yeah. So I'm just doing the same thing, except there's slightly more things going on. So when I was 16, I drew and I taped things, and then someone lent me a 4-track recorder. I had a keyboard as well, so I'd bounce recordings as well. So I got taught. I was very lucky. I got taught by this guy called Jake Solo, who's a Nigerian musician. I remember I was 14, it was New Year's Eve, and I said to him, oh, but I can't record it. and he said, look, 2 tape decks, and it was back in the 80s where, you know, like a normal kind of tape machine, I don't even know what you call them, boombox or whatever, would have inputs and outputs and microphones and mic sockets and, you know, just have everything.
If you wanted to go for those sorts, I always wanted to go for those sorts of ones. I hated when you someone give you tape recorder thing and you go but there's nowhere to put stuff.
Yeah, oh no. Yeah. Well, these did anyway. Or maybe we were a bit posh. Anyway, so we had 2. So I had 2, and he just taught me how to bounce recordings. So that was my thing from 1984 until I got a 4-track recorder when I was 21. Do you remember
why it was that you wanted to do that? Because that's a kind of you're drawing and recording stuff. Do you remember why it was that you wanted to do that? To kind of go, I don't know how to make recordings, so it's important that I learn how to bounce stuff. Do you remember why? It was just
it is purely, and it's the same thing now, that recording stuff like drawing, I think that for me exactly the same process. It's about kind of just being sort of immersed in something and just kind of making something and kind of forgetting where you are, what you're doing. It's a great way of getting away from reality. Not that I do like reality. I mean, it's fun. But it's
Yeah.
nice to get away from it from time to time.
It's good to have an outlet, yeah.
And
Where's my escape route?
yeah,
At least for a short period
and
of
it's
time.
just, I don't know, because I say it is a sort of a mildly sort of obsessive thing. But it's not that anxious. It's kind of probably the least anxious thing that I do. So it's just this kind of layering and layering of sound, and I don't even know how it makes me feel. But I know that once I've finished it and then I listen back to it, that I don't know how I did it. So I can't remember the process and I don't know how I did it. But it's really nice and it makes me feel really nice.
And that's still true now?
Yeah, I keep trying to stop. I'll say I have a break, like I was a normal person doing a normal job or something. I'm like, I need a break. I'm going to have a holiday. I'm not going to do music for a bit. And as soon as, and this has happened since I was a kid, as soon as I do that, like the next day, I'm on, and I'm humming into my tape recorder or something, and it could possibly be seen as obsessive, but it's really not horrible. It's lovely.
I think it's that you could kind of look at it from outside and go, well, it appears obsessive, but I don't know. I get the feeling that most kinds of creative callings, maybe any kind of calling, actually, whether you're an athlete, it's just something that you want to do, and it's a pull. It's like a physical pull to kind of go, I'm just going to go and
it's really
do this
nice.
now. So yeah, it is obsessive, but like that maybe has negative connotations that aren't necessary.
Yeah. When I'm being an old guy sitting here for some reason, I've decided to be an old guy today. Looking back at myself at 21, and I'm sort of annoyed with. I'd be annoyed. I think I might get me drunk. And bully me.
Slap you about a little.
Yeah.
So when you the experience obviously is something that you look back and think, oh God, I was a bit whatever I was.
Yeah.
What about the material? How do you view the material that you produced now?
I think some of the songs are quite good. Some of them, a couple of them. I think a lot of the ideas, you can hear the ideas for Apple Rabbits are there. Really, like you can hear them coming through. So there is that odd thing where you listen back to you've got recordings that you've done when you were younger, and you listen back to them and you can hear all of the stuff around you just by. I don't know how it works, but they're brilliant at sort of holding the memories, and so you can hear all of the events and all the thoughts that you were having and all the ideas that you had. And you can it's almost like you can check to see what you were like in some way. So I can hear that I was thinking the right way. But
you can hear your
I hadn't
thoughts.
quite let anyone else know it
Yeah.
And also I wasn't able to do it myself fully. So I wasn't, at the point that I am now where I can just, write for a viola and know how to write. I had no idea at that point.
Yeah.
So
how did that come about? What's the transition? I mean, I'm trying to accelerate things maybe over a long period of time that shouldn't be accelerated. But how did you get from there to here and Apple Rabbits?
Well, so I did that. I did the kind of 90s thing where I was a singer-songwriter, and then I did a whole thing of saying I'm not a singer-songwriter. I don't want to be a singer-songwriter, and I want to be in a band, but I want to be in a band that has no other members except for me. I think that would be a good idea. The kind of crazy setups. And I think it's because things are not clearly defined. There's no clear definition for it. And genres are another thing. What genre? It's this constant question. Charlie, what genre? Do you think you're electronic jazz? Kind of. Maybe a bit electronic.
Yeah.
It's always having
maybe that bit there of that song of that bit is maybe electronic.
Yeah,
jazz,
I think So I sort of went back to what I was doing before I became, because the singer-songwriter thing was a very odd phase in my life. I'd kind of gone from being like tape electronic guy in the 80s, and then became a bass player, and then played bass for a bit with people, and then had told, I was at a technical college, and I told my English teacher who'd run this club called the Gaslight Club in Peterborough, I told him that I could sing, and I'd written some songs. And I was bloody lying. And he called my bluff and said, all right then, you've got yourself a gig.
Okay.
And I went, oh, okay, fab. So I then went and borrowed a guitar and had to, and I had a Beatles songbook. And I learned a few Beatles songs, and then I nicked, well, no, I didn't nick the chords, but I took the chords from them and found the chords that I liked and wrote some songs, and I had about 4 songs, and then went and did this gig. But I didn't know if I could sing. I used to get, so being drunk sort of comes up quite a lot. And so I used to get drunk and go up the hills, because we lived in the countryside, and I'd sing up the hills. And then I'd test it out on my friends, you know, see if I could sing. And so it's like, oh, yeah, all right, it's all right. So I then went and did this. So the whole thing was winging it. I went from being a guy in a bedroom, well, not even in a bedroom, wherever I was, doing tape things and not singing, to a guy who was on a stage singing. And because I wanted to, but the only way to get me there was to embarrass myself and lie. And so that's what I did. So, but that's before the 90s bit. So that got me to Mike Howlett, because he'd heard a tape, and that was lucky, and that was just through a girlfriend. So it was all sort of lucky and winging it and not knowing. And then in the later part of the 90s, I was involved in sort of dance music, and mainly sort of big beat sort of stuff, but I was always moaning and trying to get them to do 4-track versions of it. And
this is too big.
And no, but because there was a guy called Eamon Tobin, there's a kind of like Ninja Tune style of stuff which was kind of I quite liked. And well, our first single came out on Ninja Tune. And so we'd get these records of what was coming out, and there was some really interesting stuff. And I just thought, why can't we be doing this? And everyone was trying to have a hit, and I just thought, oh no. So I then had an idea to do a band, and then Apple Rabbits sort of came out of the late 90s. And then I just sort of went to work. I went back to work. I became a play worker, started working with people with disabilities, and just sort of forgot about doing things, doing music. And we'd do music at home, but I wouldn't tell anyone about it anymore. I just kind of ignored it and just wrote.
So it became like an outlet, or back towards being an outlet.
Yeah,
I
it just went completely back to the beginning again. And I was going, and I'd have friends who were musicians, and I sort of gradually sort of not cut myself off from them. I was a bass player for a bit in a band called the Ukulele Kings, who were an offshoot of the Ukulele Orchestra. So I was still kind of involved, but I was a lyricist for a bit for somebody else. But I didn't want to kind of really make the commitment. And I was happy to do bits and bobs, and it was always nice to work. It's always nice to work with other people and do bits and bobs. But Apple Rabbits came, I was just doing it by myself, and I went off to live. Everything got a little bit mad and desperate, and I had no money. And I kept moving, because I kept having to leave places because I had no money. And I told the bank, you can either let me pay this off a little bit by little bit, or you're never going to see me again. And then they said, why? And I said, because I'm off to Paris tomorrow. So I went and moved to Paris. I just went and moved.
Okay.
And then while I was there, a guy called Doug Wolfson contacted me and said, who I was in a band called Canteen with, who was the big beat thing.
Yeah.
Do you want to make an album? And so that was pretty much it. I went over and did an album with him.
Yeah.
And came back to England. But yeah, and that's where Apple Rabbits started.
Right.
And because it kind of started, it slightly gained some momentum. So I'm still now doing it.
In the process of momentum.
Yeah. So yeah.
So
but
does it feel like it's the thing that you do now? Because there's a little bit of a theme of it being kind of when you've been, sounds like when you've been most comfortable is when it's been the thing that you do, not as the thing that you have to do.
Yeah. But and it's got to a sort of comfortable point now. But I mean, I probably don't sound like I am, but I'm probably a lot more mature about the thing now. It doesn't bother me so much. It doesn't cause me as much anxiety.
Yeah.
So I don't have to define things. So.
And you mentioned earlier on, it's totally DIY.
Yeah.
Is that because no one else is involved? Is that do it yourself, as in do it alone, or do it yourself as in we're not beholden to anyone else who's asking?
Yeah, it's me and Charlie. Charlie, who's Kilburn State, and we just do absolutely everything. So, well, no, that's not entirely true. She does all of the talking to people because she's much better at it than I am. I do the music things. And the videos and the making the music and whatnot. And then any events and stuff, we just do it together. But if like the EP, I was making an album. I was making this album, and I got myself into a bit of a tiz about albums.
Yeah.
And I got myself into a bit of a state about that whole thing of what you're supposed to do. About... Oh God, I'm just sounding terrible here.
No, I think it's fair. I think it's because honestly, no. I think it's so fascinating that this is actually what's going on in.
Yeah,
that it's actually what's going on. Like the questions about what the hell is an album anyway, and why, and what does it need to be like that?
Okay,
You're saying I'm getting myself in a tiz, and I'm thinking, no, this is actually a really genuinely good out there question that's going on.
All right, well, okay, so I maybe need to talk to you a bit more often. I got to the point was that one gets stuck in these ideas that you have to do things. So there's the kind of the big commercial end of music, with the big record companies and everything, and they have a way of doing things, and they release singles, and then the single is backing up an album.
Yeah.
But if you're a little guy, you don't actually need to do that.
Yeah.
But there's always this kind of thing, and I think, and going back to the younger people and what they're doing and what I can see that they're doing, and I'm sorry to refer to them as younger people, but they're a different generation.
Factually, they are younger. So
they're doing a different thing to me, and what they seem to be doing is just getting on with it.
Yeah,
it's not necessarily that. A lot of people are not necessarily aspiring to being like that, and I think I come from a sort of an old school thing, where you have to pretend.
And yet you've still got a big music business right now that's desperately trying to hold on to the way that things are and trying to find ways to keep it the way that it was, rather than kind of understand that it's not like that anymore. So what is it then?
It's I was going through all of this because I mean I absolutely love punk. And the funny thing about punk is it's like the Force. Yeah. It's kind of it's when I was a kid and punk was a thing. It was more of a teenage thing, and punk has sort of grown up in this way that it's become. It doesn't it's not doing the finger to everyone. It's just going. You don't have to do it that way. You can just do whatever comes into your head. You can just do it, and that's it. And if you listen to old punk records, what we were listening to yesterday, the Raincoats, and it just sounds brilliant. And that's what I was thinking. I was thinking I don't have to do an album. An album is rubbish. I want to because it's too much. Yeah. One we can't deal with the cost of recording the whole thing all at once. I mean, I can do a lot of it at home, but if I want to do extra things, it just costs a fortune. I remember when I wrote, so this last EP, which is Oberkampf, there's a whole, I've written like violin and viola parts for it, and it was, I really wanted that to go through a whole album. I wanted that to be a thing. Yeah. And it's because I wanted to do something that I really wanted to do, and I wasn't going to It wasn't that I wasn't going to compromise. I certainly was going to compromise, because if ideas come up, that's fine. But I wanted to, if I was going to get something, I was going to get the thing, and then we'll see how it goes after that. But I wasn't going to chicken out. But it cost a bloody fortune. I spent like a, like $1,000 or something, just recording extra things. And then, well, it wasn't extra things, a big part of the thing. And then we got, but then we have like people like Fran Ashcroft who did the mastering, because I like to mixing and mastering. I like to pass the mixing on to somebody else, because I'm deaf in one ear, and I'm absolutely convinced my mixes are awful. So the logistics of making an album are just ridiculous for someone who's really small, where you can do a decent size EP, and that kind of, you have to think about, cutting your costs down all the time. I mean, and also, what does it really mean? And there's the other thing. So there's the kind of practical side of things, and then there's the kind of, we're not the Beatles. We don't have Studio 2 at our disposal whenever we feel like it. We've got to work with what we have.
I said one of my other people who know me will know this. One of my common themes is I say if I'm ever going to write a book, the title of the book is going to be "The Beatles Ruined It for Everyone." Because I was just thinking about what you said. That even that kind of idea of an album as a concept of something like a collection of songs that has some sort of relevance as a collection of songs by itself. That's almost kind of back to the Beatles. And the subtitle of this book is, by the way, and if it wasn't them, it was Bob Dylan. Is that kind of idea, because even early Beatles stuff, basically a collection of singles. It's not an album. They would release singles, they would release EPs, they would release a collection of songs which was called an album, so you could buy them in a bigger package. All of this driven by the fact that you could put stuff onto a long-playing record in the first place anyway. But now it's kind of, well, who needs that? I think from a promotion and PR point of view, going back to the sort of, I suppose, old model label, promotion, magazines, the idea of a package of stuff as something that you can present and promote is easier. Yeah.
Well, I'm almost got, and it's a new thing for me, because I always used to, for years would have bought, I wouldn't buy the single, I'd buy the album. I didn't know what was on the album, I'd just buy the album. Then you'd have this whole thing of, Jesus, I've got to try and get into the album.
I've got to get through this.
I like the
there
single.
Must be something good on it soon.
Oh my God, the album's different from the single. And there's a whole world of nightmares. And it kind of makes me think of that whole thing of like, well, what's the point of the album? And kind of major record companies, I suppose we're going to blame them because they're like the government, really, in this situation.
They're the men,
Yeah. If your act hasn't got an album, then don't release an album. I think Scritti Politti, who I love, incidentally, but there was a period of time where Scritti Politti were just releasing Squitty. I said Squitty Politti. Were releasing singles for ages and ages before the album actually came out. So throughout the early 80s, there was like Absolute and Would-Be's and all of and Hypnotised. They all came out as singles. And then finally in 85, or late 85, Cupid and Psyche came out. And that seems like the way, that's it was Virgin Records, and they were sort of slightly cool at that point.
They were almost indie.
They were sort of like just one up from Rough Trade when they had Beggars Banquet. So, it's things like that. It's like, well, you actually don't need to release an album. Just have that single, just let them release singles from it. And I think when it started, that's what happened. You wouldn't get to release an album unless you sold loads of singles. So, but you had to consistently sell singles. You couldn't sell just have one hit. Because that doesn't make any sense. And so I've grown up with this idea that without knowing the process, or their process of some economical thing, of just going, well, I have to make an album. And then if you consider yourself to be a sort of serious musician, then you definitely have to make an album, because serious people don't make singles. Although serious punk people make singles, and then exclusively punk bands and we'll make just singles. So there's all these sort of ideas sort of born out of these kind of subcultures that are, you know, influencing just the way you kind of make your record. So I started off trying to make this album, and then there's a guy called Stephen Taylor, who's a producer, and I sent it to him because I just got bogged down. I just finished. I didn't know what to do with it, and he said, "I don't know what to do," and I took it as meaning, it's crap.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh man. So the idea of the EP came out, born out of the idea that it was, that I thought it was good, but that nobody else thought it was any good. So let's do it in a little chunk. And then I thought, well, let's do it on vinyl. And there's a big vinyl thing going on at the moment.
Yeah.
Which now I'm kind of thinking, is that going to, and I don't care if it dwindles. I really like it.
Yeah.
As a like a format, it's got its kind of I don't know, nerdy side or whatever. It's got this kind of real ale side.
Yeah.
But it's also got a side which is kind of like, no, it can you know, I think it might be able to stand up. See, I'm not quite, because I like it as I like the because I'm in a kind of the old sense, and I don't mean the old sense. Like a colossal pervert, and I like the idea that there's someone, you've got something something that people can't play. You've made a record that people can't play.
I'm giving you this thing. Yeah.
This is my album, but I haven't got a record player. That makes it better.
The In the Making podcast was produced by me, Martin Lumsden, at the Cream Room recording studio. You can find us at creamroom.co.uk. To find out more information about the In the Making podcast and to subscribe to future episodes, please go to inthemakingpodcast.com.